The heat was almost unbearable that afternoon in Redfield, Colorado. The asphalt rippled under the sun, and the air felt heavier than usual. Inside the small pharmacy on the corner, Emily, a 23-year-old woman, was finishing wiping down the counter when something made her stop. Outside, across the street, was a scene that few would notice, but that she couldn't ignore. An elderly man, kneeling on the sidewalk, was trying to lift a weak dog that could barely stand. The animal's skin was trembling, its breathing was shallow, and its tired eyes were barely open. Emily frowned, dropped the cloth she was holding, and hurried out. Traffic stopped for a second as she crossed without looking. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but something inside her said, "You can't pretend you didn't see it." When he got closer, he could smell the heat and dust impregnated in the dog's fur. The man, panting, had a face marked by time, and the sunken eyes of someone who had already lost almost everything. He needs help. But I can't pay. Her voice was low, almost a whisper of shame. The man didn't even look her in the eye. He spoke as if he was used to not being heard. Emily crouched down, ran her hand over the dog's neck, and saw that he was dehydrated. His back leg was swollen, and he was shaking in pain. Even so, when he felt her touch, he tried to wag his tail, as if to say, "Thank you for seeing me." Have you ever stood before someone invisible? One of those people the world seems to have forgotten. Emily didn't know the man's name, or the dog's, but in that moment, she knew she couldn't leave them there. And even without knowing what would come next, he responded with a simple gesture. He extended his hand. The old man tried to refuse. He said he didn't want to bother anyone. But the dog whimpered again, and that sound was more than physical pain. It was loneliness. It was abandonment. It was a wordless cry for help. Emily opened her car door and without hesitation said, "Come in. I'll take you." In that small town, where everyone knew each other and little changed, no one would imagine that that ordinary scene hid an extraordinary story. Because what Emily didn't know, what no one knew, was that that dog wasn't just a pet. And that man wasn't just a lonely man with a sick friend. In fact, what was about to be revealed had its roots in the war, in missions that were never written in books, and in memories that only two comrades in uniform could carry. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover may change the way you see small gestures. The story of Emily and the old sergeant was just beginning, and it all started there, with a dog, a look, and a heat that burned more inside than out. But what she did next, and what happened days later, brought an entire town to its knees. Emily's car was simple. Worn seats, broken air conditioning. The radio made noise when she went over 30 miles per hour. But at that moment, it felt like a makeshift ambulance, a lifeline that sped through the narrow streets of Redfield with the urgency of someone carrying something sacred. The dog was breathing hard in the back seat. His nostrils were dry, his belly sinking as if each breath required an absurd effort. Emily kept checking the rearview mirror while the old man next to her stared into space, his hands clasped together as if in suppressed prayer. Upon arriving at the veterinary clinic, no one moved in a hurry. The receptionist smiled politely and asked for the owner's name, documents, and information. Emily, nervous, answered for him. The old man seemed frozen, and the dog could no longer lift his head. When the nurse said that she could only see him after he filled out the form, Emily interrupted. "Please, he's dying." It was only then that the service began. The diagnosis came quickly. Generalized infection, onset of kidney failure, high fever. She needed intravenous medication, a controlled diet, and at least 2 weeks of monitoring. The vet explained everything in a technical, almost cold tone, until she told her the cost. Emily felt as if rocks had been dumped into her chest. It was more than she earned in a week of work, and her salary barely covered the rent. She thought about the nearly empty pantry at home. She thought about the overdue electric bill. She thought about the crumpled bills in her purse. And yet, She took the card out of her pocket and placed it on the counter. No bargaining, no hesitation. The sound of the machine approving the payment seemed louder than it should have been. The veteran said nothing. He just looked at her as if he recognized something the world had forgotten. Genuine compassion. On the way back, the silence in the car was as dense as the heat of the late afternoon. The dog, now with an improvised IV, slept on his owner's lap. Emily drove slowly. The man held his breath. And only when he was about to get out of the car did he break the silence. Not with words, but with a gesture. He placed his hand on the hood, closed his eyes for a few seconds, and shook his head slowly, as if to say, "You saved more than a dog." But Emily still didn't understand the depth of it. The next day, he returned to the pharmacy early. He tried to follow his normal routine, restocking shelves, serving customers, organizing stock, but he couldn't get the image of the dog stretched out on the bench out of his head, or the broken look in that man's eyes. It was as if something had been left behind, unfinished. And maybe it had. She didn't know his name. She didn't know the dog's name. And for some reason, that bothered her deeply. He tried asking the townspeople. Some knew him by sight. Others just called him the old man with the blue cap. They said he lived alone in a trailer near the railroad tracks, always with that dog by his side, silent, wearing the same worn-out jacket from decades ago. No one knew for sure if he had a family. "He's just another crazy old warnut," said someone at the bakery counter. Emily pretended not to hear, but inside the sentence kept echoing. That night, he dreamed of trenches, dogs running through the smoke, explosions, muffled screams. He woke up with his heart racing. He felt there was something in this story that had not yet been told. Something heavy, hidden under layers of silence. She returned to the clinic 2 days later. The dog was in stable condition. The sergeant, sitting next to the stretcher, gave her a small wave. "Rocco is better. Thank you." Rocco, that was the dog's name. But that was all. No other words. The old man seemed to be fighting something inside himself, a kind of hard pride, or perhaps a pain that time had not erased. In the following days, Emily began to notice strange looks at the pharmacy, veiled comments. Did she take it out of her pocket to help an old dog? It's amazing how some people like to show off. She listened to everything in silence, but she felt her skin burning. Not because of the criticism itself, but because of the coldness with which people treated her. As if the gesture of caring, had turned into weakness. One Friday afternoon, a boy approached the counter and left an envelope on the counter. "They sent it to you." Inside, a handwritten note. "You've helped more than you know. He's not just an old man. Rocco's not just a dog. And you'll find that out soon enough." Emily felt her heart race. The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was firm, almost military. That night, she stared out the window for hours, as if waiting for something. An answer, maybe. A sign. And he came. The following Saturday, 3 men in suits parked dark cars in front of the drugstore. One of them got in, asked for Emily, and handed her another envelope. Inside was a card with an Air Force crest on it. No message, no explanation. Just a name. Sergeant John H. Barker. The truth, little by little, began to reveal itself. And what Emily would soon discover would leave the entire town silent. That week, Redfield seemed grayer than usual. The weather was closing in without rain, as if the sky itself was holding back a cry that didn't want to fall. Emily walked around the city as if she were carrying something on her shoulders that no one could see. She entered silently, left silently. At every corner, she looked for a clue. An explanation, a presence. But the old man never came back to the pharmacy. Not a note, not a word. The feeling was strange. Such a simple gesture, helping a sick dog, had left a huge hole in her heart, and it went far beyond compassion. It was as if, behind those tired eyes and that silent dog, there was an untold story. A hidden truth that no one dared touch. It was one Thursday morning, while delivering chronic pain medication to a local woman, that Emily heard a name whispered. John H. Barker. One of the customers, an older gentleman, mentioned that the old man from the trailer still wore his original Vietnam combat boots, and that he had never been the same since he returned. "I've never seen a man survive on so little," he said, unaware that he was speaking to someone who knew John better than he realized. "He only talks to the dog, as if he alone knew the truth." Emily felt her stomach turn. She remembered the anonymous note, the box with the coat of arms, the silent gratitude on the hood of the car. Each little detail was building up to a bigger picture, but it was still incomplete. The next evening, she decided to walk to the trailer. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. It was a secluded spot, close to the train tracks, with tall grass all around and old cans piled up in the yard. When she arrived, it seemed too quiet. But as she got closer, she heard a muffled sound, like a moaning coming from inside. He knocked slowly. No answer. It hit again. Then he heard slow footsteps. The door opened halfway, revealing John. His eyes were sunken. His beard was unkempt. His flannel shirt had the buttons misplaced. Rocco lay on the floor, a blanket over his body. He looked worse. "I wanted to know if he was okay," Emily said hesitantly. John didn't answer. He just opened the door and made room. The trailer was dark and cramped, with old photos taped to the walls. Soldiers, helicopters, dogs in body armor. In one of them was him, 40 pounds younger, but with the same steady gaze. And next to him, the same dog. Emily was silent for a few seconds. Then she crouched down next to Rocco and stroked his head. The dog, even though weak, recognized her. His tail wagged with difficulty. John watched her as if he didn't know how to thank her, or as if he was afraid of saying too much. It was then that he whispered, "He saved me. More than once." The voice was shaking. "The ambush. I fell. My shoulder was open, bleeding. The others had retreated, but he stayed. He stayed there, by my side, barking, calling attention. And when they found us, he was still standing, even though he was injured. He wasn't just a dog. He was my partner." Emily felt her eyes well up. The pieces began to fall into place. But why did no one know about this? Why so much silence? When I came back, no one asked me what happened. They just told me to keep going. As if it were easy. As if a dog was just a dog. He looked at the wall. A wooden frame with cracked glass protected a letter. Emily walked over and read, "Operation Night Mother, 1969. Bravo Unit. 21 rescued. 2 missing. 1 survivor, Sergeant J. Barker." Below, scribbled in pen, K9 Rocco, not listed, not recognized. That was it. That was the pain he carried. A war without a medal. A comrade without a name in the records. A story swallowed up by time. And Emily, with one simple gesture, had brought it all to the surface again. She went home that night with a heavy chest. She sat up in bed, stared at the ceiling, and tried to understand how the world could be so unfair. How someone could live for 40 years being ignored by a country he swore to protect. How a hero dog could have been erased from official history. But she also knew that something had changed. And not just in him. Something inside her too. The way he saw people. The decisions he made. The way he saw other people's pain. That experience was transforming not only his routine, but his very mindset. And the city still didn't know what was about to happen. Because sometimes, all it takes is a spark to reignite an entire story. Write in the comments. Every hero deserves to be remembered. On Monday, the pharmacy was busy. It was the day to stock the anti-allergy shelf and serve half a dozen hurried customers who always arrived in a bad mood. Emily, with a discreet smile, tried to keep the routine going, but inside the storm was raging. While she was packing a baby syrup, she heard the same comment for the third time that day. She made a fool of herself. Spending money on other people's dogs? She must be trying to show off. The words came from a woman who could barely pronounce the name of the medicine she was asking for. Emily swallowed hard and didn't answer, but at that moment, the gesture of kindness that had previously made her sleep peacefully now weighed on her chest like a veiled accusation. What if it was all a lie? What if that man had made it all up? The story, the name, even the dog? Could it be possible that she had been fooled by a well-told narrative built on a fragile appearance? Doubt began to eat away at me. Between calls, she would discreetly search on her phone. She would type in John H. Barker, Vietnam, K9 Rocco. She would try to find a mention, a clipping, a photo, anything. But the results were shallow. No news reports, no accessible military records. No tributes, not even on veterans' forums. His public record seemed bare. This only increased the pain. The feeling of injustice. Emily wasn't naive. She knew that many men returned from war without recognition. But something about this lack of information was different. It was as if everything had been wiped clean on purpose. That same afternoon, when she was helping a boy of about 12 who was buying bandages for his grandfather, she noticed something strange. The boy hesitated, as if he wanted to say something. Before leaving, he went back to the counter and discreetly placed a brown envelope on the cash register. He didn't say a word. He just ran away. Emily opened it right there. Inside was a sheet of paper, yellowed with age. A typewritten letter with a U.S. Army postmark in the corner. At the top, confidential, internal use. The letter described an operation called Codex Gray from 1969. It was short, full of codes. But one passage stood out. Bravo unit ambushed in hostile territory. Officer Barker rescued alive after 3 days missing. K9 present at rescue, not identified by official report. It was little, but it was real. Emily took the letter home, where she spent hours reading and rereading each line. The existence of the operation, the mention of John Barker by name, the neglect of the dog. All of this created a new portrait of the man she had helped, a portrait tarnished by institutional neglect. But why was no one talking about it? Why had his name disappeared from almost all records? What else could be hidden? The next morning, Emily returned to the trailer. She didn't knock. She waited. She sat on the broken cement wall that surrounded the lot for almost an hour, until John appeared with a can of dog food in his hand. He was thinner. His face looked paler. But he still had that posture of someone who has buried more than he wants to. "Is this your letter?" she asked bluntly, holding out the envelope. John held the paper as if he were holding a ticking time bomb. He read it silently. He took a deep breath. Then he looked at her with a look that was a mix of guilt, fear, and something hard to name. "I never wanted anyone to know." Emily was silent, waiting for him to continue. "After the operation, they called me into the office. They said I couldn't talk about what had happened, that the mission was classified." Not even about Rocco. "They gave me a letter, a handshake, and told me to move on with my life." He shrugged, trying to hide the pain behind the bitter irony. "But how do you move on after burying all the faces that accompanied you?" That sentence vibrated in the air. Emily walked over and sat down next to him. Rocco, even though he was weak, dragged himself to his feet. "And why now?" she asked. "Why let it all come out?" John took a while to respond. "Because you didn't ask for anything. No explanation, no merit. You just helped. That was it. Simple as that. A decision without ulterior motives. A selfless gesture that had opened doors that had been locked for decades." That same night, as she was closing up the pharmacy, Emily found another envelope. This time, it was stamped with the Air Force. Inside was a black and gold card with a raised coat of arms. There was no text, just a phone number. She called. On the other end of the line, a firm and polite male voice responded with an unexpected question. "Are you responsible for assisting veteran John Barker?" Emily froze for a second. "I just took his dog to the vet." The voice continued. "What you did was more than that. And we would like to talk in person. We have something that perhaps should have been done a long time ago." Emily didn't know exactly what that meant, but something in her chest told her that the pieces were finally starting to fit together. Not everyone knew, but every choice she had made, from crossing the street to picking up that phone, was now drawing a new ending to a story that time tried to erase. And that was just the beginning. Comment here: what is true cannot be erased. The bell at the pharmacy door rang, just like any other morning. But that day, it wasn't just any regular customer who came in. Emily was organizing the bottles of painkillers on the top shelf when she noticed the strange silence that had taken over the room. There were no more hurried footsteps, no more the sound of labels being scanned. Just the muffled sound of boots on the polished floor, and her heart racing, as if she knew that the world would never be the same from then on. 3 Air Force men, all in ceremonial uniform, walked slowly down the aisles, as if searching for something sacred. The oldest of them held a rigid black box with gold inscription that gleamed in the fluorescent light. Emily Waters. She stood there motionless for a few seconds. The other employees stopped what they were doing. Customers backed away. No one understood. No one dared speak. It was as if time had frozen there, between the shelves of vitamins and the bandage section. The officer approached. "Miss Waters," he said, his voice firm and deep. Emily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. He continued, "We are here at the request of Sergeant John H. Barker." The mention of his name was enough to make the silence gain weight. The name that until a few days ago was synonymous with forgotten old age and eccentricity now sounded like something to be revered. The sergeant wrote a letter. He asked that it be read publicly in front of everyone present, including the staff and the customers. She looked around. Everyone was there, watching. Unsure if that was a compliment or a farewell. The officer carefully opened the box. He took out a wax-sealed envelope. After tearing it open, he unfolded the paper with expert hands and began to read. The letter was not long, but it carried the force of decades of silence. "My name is John H. Barker. In 1969, during Operation Codex Grey, I was left for dead in hostile territory. But my partner, a canine dog named Rocco, stayed with me. He fought through hunger, pain, and fear until our companions found us. Years later, that same dog came to save me again. And along with him, a young woman who had never seen me before, but chose to care. Emily Waters didn't just save a life. She saved a memory. She saved an honor. She saved what was left of me." Emily's eyes were already wet, but she tried to keep herself together, as if she still didn't want to believe what was happening. The officer closed the letter and continued. "On behalf of Fort Redwood AFB, and on the direct recommendation of Honor's Command, we are honored to award Miss Emily Waters the Humanitarian Service Medal. An award given to civilians whose actions demonstrate courage, compassion, and direct impact on members of the military." The black box was turned over. Inside, on a blue velvet cloth, lay the medal, a unique piece, heavy, shiny. In the center, the symbol of the American eagle, with an olive branch between its claws. Emily stepped forward. Her hands were shaking. The officer carefully pinned the medal to his work uniform, which was stained with ink from the barcodes and dust from the pills. The image said more than any speech could. The room erupted in applause. But Emily couldn't quite smile. Deep in her heart, she knew that the medal wasn't just hers. It belonged to something bigger. To a man who lived on the margins. To a dog who was never registered. To all who wait for justice even after being forgotten. And when everyone thought the ceremony was over, the officer took another item out of the box, a collar. worn, stained by time, but with a number still visible, 2317 Buith V. This is K9 Rocco's original registration number, recently found in the sealed files of the operation. The object was handed to Emily, who was now crying openly. When she touched the collar, she felt something she had never felt before. The weight of someone else's memory. The kind of memory that isn't hers, but that, somehow, has become her responsibility too. What no one knew was that that same week, another letter had already been sent. A letter that was not written by the sergeant, but by someone who was following everything from afar. Someone behind the scenes. And what was in that letter could change not only John and Rocco's story, but also the way the town of Redfield viewed all the veterans it had forgotten until then. Emily's journey was far from over, and what she would discover would leave deep marks on the souls of everyone around her. Emily held the collar in both hands, as if she were touching a living piece of history. The leather was aged, darkened at the edges, and the number 23117V was engraved with military precision. There, in the palm of her hands, was not just an object, but concrete proof of a memory that had been buried in silence and oblivion for decades. The entire pharmacy watched in awe. No one in the room dared say a word, and the only sound that could be heard was the suppressed applause giving way to the strangled breathing of those who sensed that something much greater was happening here. But deep in Emily's gaze, behind the glow of honor and public recognition, there was still a question. Why now? Why, after so many years of silence, so many files locked, so many names erased, was everything coming to light? The major, after the delivery, approached her privately. He lowered his voice, and with a softer expression, he confided, "Sergeant Barker didn't ask for any of this. He just wrote the letter. The rest was on us." Emily looked surprised. He continued, "We received a complaint. Anonymous. A former unit colleague. He said that there was a moral debt with that man, and that this debt needed to be paid in life. A complaint. A colleague from the unit. That sparked something inside her. The sergeant never said names, never mentioned faces. But what if he wasn't as alone as everyone believed?" At the end of the day, Emily walked back home with the box in her arms, her eyes still red and her head full of thoughts. As she passed through the town square, she noticed a figure sitting on the bench, looking up at the sky. It was John, with a blanket over his shoulders and Rocco lying at his feet, thinner but with his eyes alert, as if he knew something had changed. She came closer. She sat down next to him, without saying anything at first. She just watched the old dog who, even in silence, seemed to be keeping secrets that no document could reveal. "They showed up," she said, almost in a whisper. John nodded, looking ahead. "I heard." He seemed calmer, as if something inside him had finally clicked into place. As if the world had, if only for a moment, acknowledged what he had tried to carry alone for too long. "You should have told me sooner." He smiled at the corner of his mouth, with that sadness that never leaves those who have seen too much. People don't care about what hurts. They want to move on. I tried to fit in, to be ordinary. But war, it never really ends. It just changes the scenery. Emily looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears again. She knew it was true. And perhaps that was why that gesture, the simplest of all, had caused such a big change. Not just in John's life, but in the way the city looked at its forgotten people. But something was still hanging in the air. That anonymous letter. The colleague from the unit. The code on the collar. "Did you know that collar still existed?" she asked. John shook his head slowly. "I thought it had been burned with the rest of the files. When I got home, they destroyed everything that reminded me of that day. They said there could be no trace." Trail, strong words. But then why did that number survive? It was in the midst of that silence that a dark car slowly stopped on the other side of the square. A man in a suit, with grey hair and a scar on his cheek, got out, walking toward them. Rocco got up with difficulty. He stood, alert, but did not bark. He just watched, as if recognizing something ancient. John noticed too. His eyes narrowed. "Miller?" he murmured in disbelief. The man nodded, and the firm voice sounded like an echo from the past. "It took a while, brother, but I came." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. John struggled to his feet. The two men stared at each other for long seconds. No dramatic gestures, no hug, just a firm, heavy handshake, with tears they pretended not to shed. "Did you send the letter?" asked the sergeant. Miller nodded. "I heard you were still alive, and that you were still with him. I thought it was time for the world to know." In that moment, Emily understood. This wasn't just about a dog. It wasn't just about a man. It was about a generation that had returned scarred, forgotten, and carrying burdens no one saw. And sometimes, all it takes is a spark, a selfless gesture, to reignite what had been tried to extinguish. But there was still more behind all that, because Miller brought something. An envelope, sealed, with the same symbol of the mission that was erased from history. And what was inside that envelope could change not only John's past, but the backstage of the entire regiment involved in the operation. Emily had no idea, but the biggest revelation was yet to come. Comment here. All truth deserves to be revealed. It was early fall in Redfield, and the dry leaves covered the sidewalks like a silent carpet of memories. The atmosphere seemed lighter, as if the city had taken a deep breath after years of holding its chest. Emily walked slowly across the central square, her uniform jacket flapping against her body in the cold wind, and the medal, still attached to her left pocket, shone shyly in the morning sun. People greeted her with a respectful nod, some with discreet smiles, others just with a look, the kind of look that carries more than words could ever explain. But not everything was resolved, because behind the public outcry and the tributes that followed the officer's visit, there was still a box that no one dared to open. The box that Miller had brought. The envelope sealed with the postmark of the old military base, with a skull and crosshairs, and numbers scratched into the crest. John hadn't wanted to open it that day. He said he wasn't ready. He said that some truths had to wait until the heart could bear them. But that morning, something had changed. Emily found him on the trailer porch, sitting in the same wooden chair, with Rocco lying beside him. Both of them quiet, like old soldiers on watch. But there was an envelope on the table, still sealed. "They sent for it again," he said, without taking his eyes off the road. "They want me to go to Fort Redwood. They think there's still something there that belongs to me." Emily sat up slowly, trying to understand the weight of those words. "You are going?" He hesitated. "I think so, but not for me. For him." He pointed at Rocco, who raised his head for a moment, as if he understood everything. "If that envelope has what I think it has, then we haven't been completely forgotten." Little by little, the old sergeant stopped being just a man wounded by time, and became, there before the eyes of the city, a symbol. A living reminder that not all wars end with the return home. Some continue, inside, in silence. Redfield felt it. The kids started calling Rocco the medal dog. The pharmacy, once just a routine stop, became a living memorial. Veterans from other towns began visiting, bringing old photos, faded accounts, and stories no one had ever heard. The mural grew. The walls began to carry more than just products. They carried memories. And Emily, well, she changed too. Not because she felt important, but because she understood the impact that small decisions could have. It was as if that moment had awakened something inside her that had always been dormant. A quiet courage, a thirst for truth. It was in this climate of transformation that, one unexpected afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. No sender, no stamp, just a white envelope with her name handwritten on it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You did more than help. You paved the way for all of us." And below, a list of 7 names, all of them soldiers, All of them reported dead in classified operations. At the end of the list, a warning in small print. Look for them. Not all of them have been silent. Emily reread that letter more than 10 times that night. She knew that what had started as a simple gesture was becoming a mission, and that perhaps discovering the whereabouts of those names was the last piece needed for justice, true justice to be served. She looked at the bedroom wall. There was the photo. Her, smiling with the medal, and next to her, Rocco with his eyes closed in peace. Write in the comments. Some stories need to be found. If you've come this far, it's because something in this story really touched you. Maybe it was the sergeant's silence, Rocco's look, or the simple gesture of someone who chose to care. And if all of this made sense to you, then this channel is also the place for you. Here, each story has a purpose. Every detail matters. Subscribe now to continue following these journeys that almost no one tells us about, but that we need to feel. Also, leave a comment with the phrase, "This story stayed with me," just so I know you stayed until the end and walked with me all the way here. Oh, and if this video made you stop for a moment and think, leave a like. It helps more than you can imagine and shows that it's still worth telling stories with soul. There is a video here on the side that complements everything we experienced in this. Click and continue with me there. The next story is already waiting for you.